Jake Morrison was drinking his morning coffee when the alarm started screaming across Haven's Edge colony. The peaceful farming settlement had never heard those sounds before in its 12 years of existence. Jake dropped his cup and ran to the communication center where his assistant Pete Williams was frantically working the controls. "What's happening, Pete?" Jake asked as he watched the displays showing red warnings everywhere. Pete looked up with fear in his eyes and pointed to the long-range sensors. "Ships, Jake, lots of them coming in fast from the outer system, and they're not responding to our hails." The morning sun cast long shadows across the golden wheat fields that stretched to the horizon. Haven's Edge was home to 8,000 colonists, who had built a peaceful life growing crops for the inner worlds. Children played in the streets while their parents worked the farms that fed 3-star systems. Nobody expected war to come to their quiet corner of space. Lisa Grant was running toward the Colony Defense Center when the first energy beams struck the outer farms. The security chief had trained for this moment but never believed it would. "Come," she grabbed her weapon and started shouting orders to her small team of 20 guards, who were responsible for keeping peace among farmers and dealing with the occasional wild animal. "Get the civilians to the shelters now," Lisa yelled into her radio as explosions lit up the morning sky. The attacking ships were huge and dark, nothing like the friendly cargo vessels they usually visited Haven's Edge. These ships had weapons that could level city blocks, and they were using them without mercy. Jake reached the emergency broadcast system just as the first wave of alien soldiers landed in the town square. They were tall reptilian creatures with scaled skin and glowing red eyes that showed no emotion. Their weapons fired bright blue energy that turned everything it touched into ash. The Zektar Empire had come to Haven's Edge, and they brought only death. "This is Colony Administrator Morrison to all residents," Jake spoke into the microphone with a steady voice, even though his hands were shaking. "We are under attack by unknown forces. Move to emergency shelters immediately and wait for further instructions." The Zektar warriors moved through the streets like a plague. They burned homes where families were hiding and destroyed the school where teacher Mary Johnson was trying to protect her students. The aliens showed no interest in taking prisoners or demanding surrender. They had come to Haven's Edge to kill everyone and everything. War. Commander Thek Volume stood on the bridge of his flagship, watching the destruction below. The human colony was exactly what he expected from such a weak species. No real defenses. No military ships, just farmers and their children running in terror from superior Zektar might. This was the 4th human world his fleet had cleansed this month, and each one proved how pathetic these creatures were. "Commander, the humans are trying to evacuate in small ships," reported his weapons officer Kekstar. Thek Volume watched the displays, showing civilian shuttles lifting off from the colony's small spaceport. "Destroy them all," he ordered without emotion. "No human will escape to spread word of our power." Lisa Grant fought desperately to hold the defense center as families ran past her toward the evacuation ships. Her guards were falling one by one to the superior alien weapons, but they kept fighting to buy time for the civilians. "Young officer." Brad Davis took a plasma bolt to the chest while covering a group of children. His last words were, "Get them out of here, Lisa." The emergency shelters that were supposed to protect the colonists became death traps as Zektar warriors used heavy weapons to blast through the reinforced doors. Dr. Chris Parker tried to shield the patients in his medical center, but the aliens showed no mercy to the sick and wounded. They gunned down everyone they found without pause or regret. Jake Morrison ran through the burning streets trying to reach his family's home. His wife Karen and daughter Emma were supposed to be at the school, but he prayed they had made it to the shelters. Smoke filled the air and bodies littered the ground as the Zektar continued their systematic destruction of everything human. The colony's small communication array was still working, and Jake knew he had to send a warning to Earth. "Command." He climbed the tower while plasma bolts flew around him and reached the emergency transmitter. With shaking fingers, he activated the distress beacon and spoke into the microphone. "This is Haven's Edge colony under attack by alien forces. They are killing everyone. Send help." "Send anyone? Don't let them do this to other worlds?" Lisa Grant Last stand came at the spaceport where she and 5 remaining guards tried to protect the final evacuation shuttle. The ship was overloaded with refugees, including Jake Morrison, who had never found his family. As the shuttle lifted off with its human cargo, Lisa stood alone, firing her weapon at the advancing Zektar until their return fire finally cut her. Down. War Commander Thek Volume watched the last human shuttle escape into hyperspace and felt satisfaction at a job well done. Haven's Edge was now a burning wasteland with no human life remaining. The crops were ash, the buildings were rubble, and the message was clear. Humans were weak, and the Zektar Empire would cleanse them from space one world at a time. The few dozen survivors who escaped in the damaged shuttle would carry word of what happened to Haven's Edge. They would tell Earth Command how 8,000 peaceful colonists died in a single morning. They would describe the systematic murder of families who had never hurt anyone. But they would not know that their distress call had been received and recorded in the deepest levels of human military. Command. Jake Morrison sat in the cramped shuttle holding a photo of his lost family as the ship jumped to hyperspace. Around him, other survivors wept for their dead and asked why the aliens had come to destroy their peaceful world. None of them knew that their sacrifice would awaken something in humanity that the galaxy had never seen. The dragons were stirring in their sleep, and soon the Zektar Empire would learn the price of attacking human families. Admiral Kate Sullivan was reviewing routine reports in her office aboard Unity Station when Lieutenant Commander Tony Brooks burst through her door without knocking. His face was pale and his hands shook as he held a data tablet containing the most horrific intelligence reports she had ever seen. "Admiral, we have a situation," Tony said as he activated the wall display. Images of burning colonies filled the screen, showing the complete destruction of Haven's Edge and 3 other human settlements. Bodies lay scattered in the streets while alien ships flew overhead, completing their work of total extermination. Kate stood slowly as she processed what she was seeing. In 30 years of military service, she had seen combat and death, but nothing like this systematic slaughter of civilians. The aliens had not even attempted to communicate or demand surrender. They had simply arrived and killed everyone they could find. "How many colonies, Admiral?" she asked, though she dreaded the answer. Tony swallowed hard before responding. 12. Confirmed attacks in the past 2 weeks. 4 more colonies have gone silent, and we suspect the worst. Total casualties are estimated at over 100,000 civilians. The reports kept coming in from across human space. Mining stations, research outposts, farming colonies, and trading posts all suffered the same fate. The alien ships arrived without warning, destroyed everything human, and disappeared back into deep space. No demands were made and no mercy was shown to anyone. Captain Ryan Torres had seen the aftermath firsthand when his exploration ship, Aurora, responded to a distress call from Kepler Base. The research station that once housed 500 scientists was now a smoking crater on an airless moon. Only one escape pod had survived the attack, and inside was Dr. Amy Watson, barely alive after drifting in space for 6 days. "They came out of nowhere," Amy whispered from her hospital bed as medics worked to save her life. "The Zektar warriors hunted us through the corridors like we were animals. They seemed to enjoy it. I watched them corner Dr. Frank Miller and his family in the lab. They could have killed them quickly, but instead they made it last." Ryan recorded every word of Amy's testimony, knowing that Earth Command needed to understand what humanity was facing. These were not soldiers fighting a war, but monsters who took pleasure in causing pain. The Zektar Empire had revealed their true nature, and it was worse than anyone imagined. News of the attacks spread through human space faster than the military could control it. Families with relatives on frontier worlds demanded answers while politicians called for immediate action. The media showed images of the destroyed colonies 24 hours a day, asking why the military had failed to protect innocent civilians. Admiral Sullivan found herself in emergency meetings with Earth Command's highest officials, including General Robert Hayes, who controlled humanity's defensive fleets. The reports on the table painted a grim picture of an enemy that possessed superior technology and showed no interest in negotiation or peace. What do we know about the Zektar Admiral, General? Hayes asked as he studied intelligence photos of the reptilian warriors. Kate activated a holographic display showing what little information they had gathered from survivors and shipwreckage. They appear to be a militaristic empire that views other species as inferior. Their warriors follow a code that values strength above all else. The pattern of attack suggested the Zektar were testing human defenses and finding them lacking. Frontier colonies had minimal protection and no military ships nearby. The aliens had learned that humans were spread thin across hundreds of worlds, with most of their population living peacefully without weapons or training. Captain Torres arrived at Unity Station with the Aurora carrying more survivors and evidence from the attacks. Engineer Scott Davis had managed to record scanner data showing the alien ships before Kepler base was destroyed. The Zektar vessels were heavily armed, and their weapons technology was decades ahead of standard human military equipment. They're not just random raiders, Admiral Ryan reported to the command staff. This is a coordinated campaign designed to drive humanity out of space. The attacks follow supply routes and target colonies that support multiple systems. They know exactly what they're doing. Dr. Amy Watson provided the most chilling intelligence when she described overhearing Zektar communications during the attack. The aliens spoke of humans as vermin that needed to be exterminated before they could spread further across the galaxy. This was not a territorial dispute, but a campaign of genocide. Admiral Sullivan called an emergency session with the Colonial Defense Council, where representatives from every human world gathered via hologram. The mood was grim as she presented the evidence and casualty reports. Panic was spreading through the outer colonies as families abandoned their homes and fled toward the safety of the inner systems. "We need to evacuate the remaining frontier settlements immediately," urged Governor Linda Foster from New Geneva Colony. "My people are terrified and demanding protection we cannot provide." Similar requests came from dozens of other worlds as local governments struggled to maintain order, but Admiral Sullivan knew that evacuation would only delay the inevitable. Zektar had shown they could strike anywhere in human space, and their technology gave them overwhelming advantages. Running away would only prove to the aliens that humanity was as weak as they believed. "We have one option," Kate said quietly. As the council meeting continued, "There are protocols in place for this type of existential threat. Resources that have been kept in reserve since the Centauri War ended 40 years ago." The room fell silent as everyone understood what she was suggesting. General Hayes nodded slowly, knowing the terrible decision that lay ahead. "Are you certain, Admiral, that the situation warrants such extreme measures?" he asked. Kate looked at the images of dead children scattered across Haven's Edge and gave her answer. "The Zektar want to exterminate our species. They've made that clear. It's time to show them what happens when you threaten human families." The authorization codes were entered, and classified files that had been sealed for decades were opened. Deep in the hidden levels of Earth Command, automated systems began awakening protocols that most of humanity didn't know existed. The dragons were about to wake up, and the galaxy would learn why humans had survived every threat they had ever faced. Admiral Sullivan closed the files and looked out at the stars where human colonies were burning. The Zektar Empire had made their choice, and now humanity would make theirs. The peaceful farmers and scientists were dead, but something else was stirring in the darkness between worlds. The elevator descended 20 levels below Earth Command headquarters into sections that existed on no official blueprints. Admiral Kate Sullivan stood silently as the security scanners confirmed her identity 3 times before the doors opened, to reveal a corridor lined with armed guards who had never seen daylight. Colonel Marcus Kane was waiting in the briefing room when she arrived. He looked exactly like what he was, a weapon forged by 40 years of humanity's darkest military secrets. His eyes held the cold calculation of a man who had ended wars through methods that peaceful citizens could never imagine. Behind him sat the senior staff of the 7th Dragon Division, the unit that officially did not exist. Admiral Kane said without emotion as she took her seat at the head of the table, "I assume the Zektar situation has reached the point where civilian leadership requires our services." His voice carried no judgment, but everyone in the room understood the gravity of what was happening. The dragons only awakened when humanity faced extinction. Major Elena Rodriguez activated the holographic display showing the destroyed colonies and casualty reports. She had studied every detail of the Zektar attacks with the analytical mind that made her the division's tactical genius. The enemy has revealed their capabilities and intentions clearly. They possess superior individual technology, but their strategy shows typical warrior culture weaknesses. Lieutenant Colonel Sam Parker leaned forward as he reviewed psychological profiles of the Zektar leadership. His specialty was breaking enemy morale through carefully planned operations that left lasting trauma in the minds of survivors. They believe strength comes from causing fear in weaker opponents. This makes them predictable and gives us multiple vectors for psychological warfare. Admiral Sullivan placed the authorization documents on the table and watched as Kane reviewed them without changing expression. The civilian government has agreed to lift all restrictions on Dragon Division operations. You have unlimited resources and complete operational autonomy. The only requirement is that the Zektar threat must be eliminated permanently. Kane nodded and activated his personal communicator to contact the other Dragon commanders scattered across human space. Captain Nicole Blake commanded the Stealth Operations Battalion from her base in the asteroid belt. Captain Alex Turner led the assault forces from a hidden facility near the Outer Rim. Both units had been training continuously for decades, waiting for this moment. "Dragons, this is Dragon 1, Kane spoke into the secure channel. "Authorization Omega Black has been confirmed. Begin immediate deployment to forward positions. Rules of engagement are unrestricted. Primary objective is complete elimination of Zektar military capacity with maximum psychological impact on enemy leadership." The 7th Dragon Division had been created during the Centauri Rebellion when human colonies declared independence and threatened to tear apart the species. Regular military forces proved inadequate against enemies who knew their tactics and capabilities. The Dragons were something different. Enhanced soldiers trained in methods that bordered on the supernatural. Major Rodriguez pulled up tactical displays showing Zektar fleet movements and base locations. Intelligence indicates they operate from fortified positions in the Caridian sector with supply lines extending back to their home systems. Standard military doctrine would suggest attacking their logistics, but that approach will take months and cost thousands more civilian lives. Kane studied the data with eyes that had planned the destruction of entire rebel fleets during the Civil War. The Zektar expect us to fight like the civilians they murdered. They believe humans are weak because our farmers and scientists couldn't resist their warriors. This misconception will be their downfall. Lieutenant Colonel Parker activated files showing psychological profiles of War Commander Thek Volume and other Zektar leaders. Their culture values personal combat and views technology as secondary to warrior skills. They take pride in defeating opponents through superior fighting ability. We can use this arrogance against them. The Dragon Division base is hidden throughout. Human space began full activation for the first time in 40 years. Weapons that existed only in classified files were loaded onto ships painted in colors that absorbed all light. Soldiers whose genetic modifications had been illegal for decades prepared equipment that could level mountains or slip through starship hulls like ghosts. Captain Blake's stealth battalion consisted of operatives who could infiltrate any facility and disappear without leaving evidence they had ever been there. Her soldiers were enhanced with reflexes that bordered on precognition and training that made them living weapons. They had ended the Centauri Rebellion by eliminating rebel leadership so efficiently that surviving colonies surrendered rather than face similar fates. Captain Turner's assault forces were the opposite extreme, soldiers designed to destroy anything. They encountered with overwhelming firepower and tactical superiority. His units had broken the siege of New Terra by destroying an entire rebel fleet in 6 hours using weapons that left no wreckage for examination. Enemy survivors spoke of demons who fought without fear or mercy. The Zektar made a critical error. When they chose genocide over conquest, Kane explained to his staff as deployment orders went out across the division. If they had demanded tribute or territory, we might have negotiated. By threatening human families, they have activated protocols that will not stop until their species no longer poses a threat. Admiral Sullivan watched the Dragon Division prepare for deployment and felt the weight of what she had unleashed. These soldiers were humanity's ultimate weapon, but they came with a price that peaceful citizens could never understand. Once awakened, the dragons fought until the enemy was completely destroyed or humanity itself was extinct. Major Rodriguez coordinated with intelligence services to gather real-time information on Zektar positions and movements. We have confirmation of enemy bases on 14 worlds with fleet concentrations at Nexus Point and Caridian Prime. Estimated enemy strength is 200 capital ships and 50,000 ground forces. Kane looked at the numbers and smiled without humor. The 7th Dragon Division has 3,000 active personnel and 12 operational starships. The Zektar believe this makes us outnumbered. He paused as the tactical displays updated with Dragon unit positions. They are about to learn why. Mathematics means nothing when you face enhanced humans who have trained for this moment their entire lives. The final briefing ended with Kane issuing orders that would change the balance of power in the galaxy. All units deploy immediately to forward positions. Remember your training and trust your enhancements. The Zektar wanted to see what happens when they threaten human families. Show them why peaceful species keep dragons sleeping in the dark. Commander Zaxler was reviewing patrol reports on Caridian Prime when his communications officer started screaming warnings about ships emerging from hyperspace. The Zektar base commander looked at his displays expecting to see human refugee vessels or perhaps a small military patrol that had wandered into their territory by mistake. Instead, he saw 3 black ships that his sensors could barely detect even though they were right in front of him. The vessels were unlike anything in Zektar databases, sleek and predatory like hunting creatures from the deep ocean. Before Zaxler could order his defenses to respond, the human ships opened fire with weapons that turned his orbital platforms into expanding clouds of plasma. Captain Nicole Blake stood on the bridge of her stealth ship, Shadowhawk, watching the Zektar-based defenses collapse under precisely targeted strikes. Her enhanced reflexes allowed her to process tactical information faster than any computer, while her genetic modifications gave her the endurance to fight for days without rest. Around her, the crew worked with mechanical efficiency born from decades of training. Blake to all Dragon units, she spoke into her communicator as the first wave of attacks destroyed every weapon emplacement on the base. Primary defenses are neutralized. Beginning Phase 2 operations. Her soldiers moved through the facility like ghosts, appearing behind enemy warriors who never saw them coming. The Zektar warriors on Caridian Prime had conquered dozens of species and considered themselves the galaxy's finest fighters. They discovered too late that humans had been preparing for this war since before the Zektar Empire existed. Dragon Division soldiers moved through corridors with speed that defied physics and struck with weapons that cut through alien armor. Like paper, Sergeant Bill Hayes led his squad through the base command center where Zektar officers were trying to coordinate a defense against an enemy they could not understand. The enhanced soldiers appeared in their midst without warning, disabling weapons and communication systems with surgical precision. Within minutes, the command staff was unconscious and the base was under human control. Commander Zaxler found himself face-to-face with Captain Blake in his own office as alarms screamed throughout the facility. The human woman stood barely 5 feet tall, but her eyes held a coldness that made the veteran warrior step backward. "Your empire made a mistake when it attacked our colonies," she said in perfect Zektar language. "Now you will carry a message to your leaders." Meanwhile, across the sector, Major Elena Rodriguez was implementing Phase 2 of the Dragon Division strategy at Nexus Point, where the Zektar maintained their largest fleet depot. Her assault ships emerged from hyperspace in perfect formation and began systematically disabling enemy vessels with weapons that targeted specific ship systems, rather than destroying them outright. "Rodriguez to all units," she broadcast as her tactical genius guided the battle. "Remember, the objective is psychological impact, not total destruction. disable their ships, and leave the crews alive to report what they have seen. The dragon ships moved like dancers around the larger Zektar vessels, avoiding their heavy weapons while precisely targeting engines and weapon systems. The Zektar fleet commander, Vokter, watched in horror as his mighty warships were reduced to helpless hulks, floating in space. The human vessels were smaller and fewer in number, but they fought with a coordination that seemed impossible. Every shot hit exactly where it would cause maximum damage, while avoiding areas that would kill the crew. Captain Alex Turner's assault battalion struck the Zektar ground forces on 3 different worlds simultaneously. His enhanced soldiers dropped from orbit in pods that could penetrate any defense and landed among enemy positions like bolts of lightning. The aliens discovered that humans could be far more dangerous than they had ever imagined. On the mining world of Korvax 7, Turner himself led the assault against War Commander Bigvar's garrison. The Zektar warriors had expected to fight frightened civilians like those they had massacred on human colonies. Instead, they faced opponents who moved faster than their eyes could follow and struck with weapons that seemed to bend the laws of physics. Turner to dragon control, he reported as his soldiers systematically dismantled the enemy base. Korvax 7 is secure. Enemy forces neutralized with minimal casualties on both sides. Psychological objectives achieved. Around him, captured Zektar warriors stared in shock at humans who had defeated them without breaking a sweat. Lieutenant Colonel Sam Parker orchestrated the psychological warfare campaign from his command ship as reports came in from Dragon units across the sector. Every attack followed the same pattern: overwhelming human superiority, precise targeting that left survivors, and clear messages that the Zektar Empire had awakened something far beyond their understanding. The captured Zektar officers were shown recordings of the attacks and given detailed explanations of how easily their defenses had been bypassed. Parker's psychological training allowed him to identify exactly which information would cause maximum trauma to the warrior culture mindset. Your empire believed humans were weak because our civilians could not resist your warriors, he told each prisoner. You have now seen what our soldiers can do. Commander Zaxter was released with recordings of the Caridian Prime assault and orders to deliver them to Zektar High Command. The base that had once housed 5,000 warriors was intact but completely under human control. Not a single Zektar had been killed, but their military equipment was now scrap metal and their pride was shattered. Captain Blake ensured that every communication system in the sector broadcast the same message. On Zektar military frequencies, you attacked our families. Now you face the dragons. This is what happens when you threaten peaceful humans. The psychological impact spread faster than any physical attack could have achieved. The Zektar warriors who survived the dragon attack spoke in whispers about humans who fought like demons and seemed to know their every move before they made it. The myth of Zektar military supremacy began to crumble as word spread through their empire that humanity possessed weapons and soldiers beyond their comprehension. War Commander Thek Volume received the reports from across the sector and felt fear for the first time in his military career. The humans had not just defeated Zektar forces, but had done so while making it clear they could have easily killed everyone. The psychological message was terrifying. These dragons were holding back and showing mercy that could be withdrawn. At any moment, the Dragon Division had achieved their primary objective in less than 72 hours. Zektar military capacity in the border sectors was eliminated, and their leadership was beginning to understand the true cost of attacking human civilians. But the dragons were just getting started. War Commander Thekval paced his flagship command deck as reports of defeats poured in from every sector of the frontier. The architect of the human colony massacres found his mighty fleet trapped in the Zarian system while black ships materialized. Around them like predators circling wounded prey. His warriors who had once boasted of their superiority now whispered fearfully about the demons that hunted them. Captain Alex Turner's assault team had been systematically dismantling Thekval's fleet for 6 hours using tactics that defied everything the Zektar knew about warfare. The human ships struck with surgical precision, disabling weapons and engines while leaving life support intact. They could have destroyed every vessel in minutes but chose instead to demonstrate their complete dominance. HFY volume to all ships. The war commander broadcast as another of his cruisers went dark with its weapons destroyed. These humans fight without honor, using coward tactics to avoid direct combat. But even as he spoke the words, HFY volume knew they were lies meant to preserve what remained of his warriors. Morale. Turner himself materialized on the flagship, bridge through a transportation method that Zektar science could not explain. The human captain stood calmly among dozens of alien warriors who raised their weapons only to discover they had been disabled by methods they could not detect. War Commander HFY volume, Turner said in perfect Zektar language. You are under arrest for war crimes against human civilians. The concept of war crimes was alien to Zektar culture, where might determined right and the strong ruled through force. HFY volume expected either death in battle or execution, as befitted a defeated warrior. Instead, he found himself transported to a holding cell while his fleet was systematically disabled, and his crew left alive to witness human superiority. Meanwhile, on the neutral station Babylon's Gate, Supreme Commander Victor of the Zektar High Council demanded an emergency meeting with human representatives. The leader of the alien empire had received reports that seemed impossible. Entire fleets defeated by a handful of human ships, bases captured without casualties, and warriors driven mad by fear of an enemy they could not understand. Admiral Kate Sullivan arrived at the meeting accompanied by Colonel Marcus Kane, whose presence made the Zektar guard step backward involuntarily. The Dragon Division commander carried no visible weapons, but every alien in the room sensed the deadly potential that surrounded him like an invisible aura. His enhanced genetics and decades of training made him something beyond normal human limits. Supreme Commander Victor, Admiral Sullivan spoke formally as the meeting began. Your empire initiated hostilities against human colonies and civilians. We are here to discuss terms for ending this conflict. The Zektar leader's scaled features showed confusion at the concept of negotiation after military defeat. Victor activated holographic displays showing the damaged fleets and captured bases, while demanding answers. What manner of weapons do you possess that can defeat superior Zektar technology? Your colonies showed no military capabilities when our warriors cleansed them. His voice carried the arrogance of a species that had never faced genuine defeat. Colonel Kane stepped forward and spoke with the quiet confidence of someone who held absolute power. You wanted to see what happens when you attack human families. These are our dragons. They have been sleeping for 40 years waiting for threats like your empire. They do not stop until the danger is completely eliminated. The psychological warfare campaign orchestrated by Lieutenant Colonel Sam Parker had achieved devastating results throughout Zektar space. Captured warriors spoke of humans who moved like ghosts and struck like lightning. The recordings of defeats played continuously on military channels, showing Zektar forces helpless against enemies they could barely see. Supreme Commander Victor attempted to negotiate from a position of strength, demanding that humanity recall their demons and return to their previous borders. His warrior culture could not comprehend the idea that he had already lost the war. The Zektar Empire will not be dictated to by inferior species, he declared to the assembled diplomats. Admiral Sullivan's response was delivered with the calm certainty of someone who held overwhelming military advantage. Your forces attacked and murdered over 100,000 human civilians, including children. The Dragon Division has been authorized to eliminate the Zektar Empire as a threat to human existence. This meeting is your opportunity to choose survival over extinction. The evidence presented during the negotiations painted a clear picture of Zektar military collapse. Base after base had fallen to Dragon forces, while fleets were systematically disabled and captured. The aliens discovered that their superior technology meant nothing against opponents, who had spent decades preparing for exactly this type of conflict. War Commander HFY volume was brought before an interspecies tribunal to face charges for his role in the colony massacres. The concept of holding military leaders accountable for their actions was more terrifying to Zektar culture than death in battle. Their honor-based society could not understand humans who valued justice over simple victory. Captain Nicole Blake delivered the final ultimatum to the Zektar High Council while her stealth ships maintained positions throughout their territory. All Zektar military forces will withdraw from human space immediately and establish a 50-light-year buffer zone. Any future aggression against human civilians will result in the complete elimination of your species. The terms were non-negotiable, and backed by overwhelming force that the aliens could not resist. Supreme Commander Vector signed the agreements while his subordinates watched in shame at their empire's humiliation. The mighty Zektar had been reduced to begging for mercy from the species they had attempted to exterminate. Jake Morrison stood in the rebuilt town square of Haven's Edge as construction crews worked to restore what the Zektar had destroyed. The colony administrator had survived the massacre only to return and help rebuild with reparations paid by the defeated empire. Around him, families who had fled during the attacks were coming home to start new lives, the memorial wall displayed the names of 8,000 colonists who had died during the Zektar assault. Jake placed flowers at the base while thinking about his lost family and the price that had been paid for peace. The dragons had avenged the innocent, but the cost in human lives could never be forgotten. Admiral Sullivan sealed the Dragon Division protocols once more, hoping they would not be needed again for another generation. The enhanced soldiers returned to their hidden bases while the galaxy absorbed the lesson that humanity had taught. Other species took careful note that peaceful civilizations sometimes kept terrible guardians sleeping in the darkness. Colonel Kane reminded his troops that they were the reason humanity could remain peaceful because others now understood the price of forcing them to be otherwise. The dragons slept again, but their legend spread throughout known space as a warning to anyone who might threaten human families in the future.